More questions? Please, ask.
Yeah, Murry, in terms of your comment about that there is an increasing gap between the graduates of educational programs and the needs of the workplace or career or self-learning or whatever you want to phrase it as. Do you see this as a systemic issue, or do you see this more as an issue of, I look at something like the rating system, the U.S. News and World Report, of the top colleges, top graduate programs, et cetera, et cetera. And I have a wife who's on the Yale faculty, and I see the disconnect between those ratings as being almost meaningless and the experience of, I think, what you're talking about in terms of what people should be as a graduate of those programs. I guess the question is that it's, without getting into the notion of vocational training, how do you take the traditional university or K-16 system and look at it from the point of view of what you see as needs? In other words, how does that gap get closed from your point of view?
All right. That's interesting. When I was back in a previous existence, I worked at an investment bank where everybody who was an executive assistant had an MBA. And the conversation eventually was getting around to an MBA predicts absolutely nothing. It has zero correlation to whether you're successful in that world or not. So I'm not sure I have a complete answer to this. I think a lot of it has to do with the expectations that people have about where knowledge comes from and who's allowed to validate knowledge. So do you come with enough sense of, I guess the term is empowerment, although that's got a lot of fuzz around it. Do you trust your own instincts and the instincts of your friends more than you trust the authority structures? So if you look at the conversation that's going on about, is it Wikipedia or is it the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is an authoritative source? I think my position on that would be that the Encyclopedia Britannica and what it represents comes from a command and control, top-down model of authority. Wikipedia, on the other hand, represents a deep faith in the ability of collective intelligence to come to the correct answer and to be self-correcting when it's not. So what people who work in the same kind of jobs I do and think about what they're trying to do find, there's a couple of standard instructional models. There's pedagogy, which is how children get taught, and that's essentially they have no experience against which to calibrate the world, and so they need an authority figure to teach them about the world. That's essentially a passive model of learning. You've got what in my world, the parallel to that is andragogy, which is how adults learn, and that is that adults have to be engaged in the learning. You have to answer the what's in it for me question, and they can't be passive. They have to be active learners. And I think there's a third path coming, which doesn't have a name, so I get to make it up. And I'll call it, for the sake of conversation, autogogy. And that is that the individual learner knows their own situation better than any other and has to be given authority and resources in order to make their own answers to questions. And I don't see that in a lot of the people who initially come into the kinds of organizations that I've worked in. They still carry industrial age power systems around in their head, and what constitutes knowledge and authority has to have some kind of stamp on it, as opposed to what works on a day-to-day basis in the context of the work. And again, I issue the disclaimer that we're not talking about Greek drama here. We're talking about doing work in the real world.